Standing in front of reporters this week, NASA astronaut Jessica Watkins said something that on its surface sounds like a routine mission statement, and underneath it is anything but. She said she is honored to serve as commander for Crew-13 alongside Luke, Josh, and Sergey, and that she's personally looking forward to returning to the International Space Station, as well as flying on Dragon a second time. That single sentence carries more weight than it first appears to, because in a few weeks, Jessica Watkins is set to become the first NASA astronaut in history to fly to orbit twice aboard a SpaceX Crew Dragon spacecraft. This is where the story actually begins, not with a countdown clock, but with a room full of reporters asking 4 people, 3 of whom have never left Earth's atmosphere, what it feels like to be days away from launch. Let's back up and lay out exactly who is flying and when, because the specifics matter here more than the general excitement around any launch. NASA's Crew-13 mission is targeting liftoff no earlier than September 12th at 6:30 in the evening, launching aboard a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket from Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida. The crew consists of 4 people from 3 different space agencies. Jessica Watkins of NASA serves as commander on her second spaceflight after previously flying aboard Crew-4 in 2022, where she spent 170 days aboard the station across expeditions 67 and 68, and became the first black woman to live and work long-term aboard the ISS. Luke Delaney of NASA, a Volusia County, Florida native and former naval aviator, serves as pilot on his first trip to space. Joshua Kutryk of the Canadian Space Agency, a fighter pilot from Alberta, serves as mission specialist, becoming the first Canadian astronaut assigned to a NASA commercial crew flight. And Sergey Teteryatnikov of Roscosmos, a submariner making his first trip to space, rounds out the crew as the 4th mission specialist, continuing the long-running crew exchange program between the American and Russian space programs aboard the station. Here's a detail worth sitting with for a second, because it carries its own quiet weight. This is the first NASA mission numbered 13, since the successful failure of Apollo 13 back in 1970, a flight whose name has become shorthand in American spaceflight history for disaster narrowly avoided through sheer engineering ingenuity. NASA didn't rename this mission or skip the number. Crew-13 is Crew-13, and the 4 people flying it are doing so under a designation that carries more historical baggage than almost any other number in the agency's history. Once the crew docks, they'll join Expedition 75 already underway aboard the station, effectively taking the baton from Crew-12, continuing what Watkins described as the station's continuous human presence in low Earth orbit, a presence that has now run unbroken for more than a quarter century. That handoff detail matters more than it might seem, because the International Space Station itself is now on a countdown of its own. NASA has confirmed the station remains on track for retirement and deorbit beginning as soon as 2030, which means every crew rotation flying up there now is, in a very real sense, flying toward the final chapters of the station's operational life, not the middle of an open-ended program. The mission's timeline has also been deliberately compressed. Crew-13 was originally slated to launch in November. NASA moved that date up to mid-September earlier this year, part of a broader posture shift under NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman aimed at increasing the overall cadence of launches across the agency, a philosophy that extends beyond the ISS program and into NASA's Artemis lunar efforts as well. Faster turnaround, tighter scheduling, more frequent flights. That's the operating environment Crew-13 is flying inside of, and it's part of why this particular mission has been described by NASA itself as an unusually busy one even before liftoff. Speaking to that exact point, Watkins told reporters, the crew is expecting, in her words, a very busy mission, with a heavy workload of station maintenance, both internal and external, alongside several spacewalks already on the docket. That's not filler language. Extravehicular activity, EVAs, spacewalks outside the pressurized safety of the station itself, represent some of the highest risk, highest precision work astronauts perform in orbit. And having several already scheduled before the crew has even launched tells you this rotation isn't being planned as a quiet, low-intensity stay. It's being planned as a working mission from the moment they dock. Before any of that happens, though, the crew has one more critical rehearsal ahead of them. This Friday, Crew-13 is scheduled to conduct what NASA and SpaceX are calling a test drive of the Dragon spacecraft that will ultimately carry them to orbit. During that rehearsal, the astronauts will run through suit checks, leak checks, and full communications checks. Essentially a dry run of launch day procedures without actually leaving the ground, designed to catch any equipment or procedural issues while there's still time to fix them. It's the kind of unglamorous, methodical step that rarely makes headlines on its own, but is exactly the type of preparation that turns a mission from a plan on paper into something 4 human beings are actually willing to strap themselves into a rocket for. There's also a smaller, stranger detail attached to this particular launch that's worth mentioning, simply because of how it captures the broader ecosystem Crew-13 is launching inside of. NASA revealed this week that Cybertrucks, manufactured by Tesla, another company under Elon Musk's umbrella alongside SpaceX, will be present on the launch pad for this mission. It's a small footnote next to the actual human stakes of the flight, but it's a reminder of just how tightly interconnected the commercial and government sides of American spaceflight have become. The same billionaires' companies building the rocket, the capsule, and, apparently, the support vehicles rolling around the pad on launch day. Now to the part of this story that actually reveals something deeper about what it means to fly a mission like this in 2026. And it came not from a prepared statement, but from a single question asked directly to mission specialist Josh Kutryk during the press briefing. A reporter asked Kutryk two things back to back. First, a logistical question: how far into the mission will his wife be due to give birth? Kutryk answered that he'd need to check the exact date, but that it falls roughly midway through the mission, adding, with visible dry humor, that the timing was, in his words, pretty much perfect, before immediately clarifying that he meant that entirely sarcastically. It's a small human moment, the kind that rarely survives into official mission summaries, but it says something real about what these astronauts are actually giving up to fly. Kutryk is going to spend a chunk of his time in orbit, hundreds of miles above his own family, missing the birth of his child, doing station maintenance and running experiments in microgravity while his wife goes through labor without him on the ground. Then came the second half of the question, and this is the part of the briefing that carries the most weight in this entire story. The reporter asked Kutryk, given his Ukrainian heritage, how stressful it has been to launch alongside a Russian crewmate, whether he and Sergey Teteryatnikov avoid any mention of the ongoing war between their countries, and how the two of them managed to set that conflict aside for the good of the mission. It's not a question reporters ask casually. It's a question that goes directly at the fault line running underneath one of the most cooperative, longest-running international partnerships in the history of human spaceflight. A partnership that has, since the earliest days of the ISS program, deliberately kept American and Russian crews flying and working together even as relations between their two governments have deteriorated sharply on the ground. Kutryk's answer is worth walking through carefully because it's the emotional and thematic core of this entire pre-launch story. He called it a very serious question and started his answer by saying plainly that there's no issue inviting Teteryatnikov to jump in if he wanted to add anything. He went on to explain that in his career, what he's consistently noticed about the biggest, most intractable world problems is that human to human, there is very seldom an actual issue between the people doing the work. Speaking specifically from his own experience, astronaut to astronaut, engineer to engineer, technician to technician, he described the space community as full of wonderfully talented people who are all working toward the same end, and said that this, in itself, might be one of the most important underlying reasons why the work being done in space right now matters as much as it does. He said the geopolitical tension has never affected their day-to-day operations, and that he doesn't believe it ever would. Human to human, in his words, it's nothing but positive. That answer deserves to be read again, slowly, because of exactly what it's describing. A Canadian astronaut of Ukrainian heritage and a Russian cosmonaut are about to spend months together in a pressurized metal tube orbiting the Earth at roughly 17,000 miles an hour, dependent on each other for survival in one of the most unforgiving environments human beings have ever attempted to live and work in, while their two countries remain locked in one of the defining geopolitical conflicts of this decade. And Kutryk's answer wasn't diplomatic deflection. It was a direct, specific claim that the working relationship between the individual professionals inside this program has simply never been affected by what's happening between their governments on the ground. That claim isn't unique to this crew. It's actually consistent with how the ISS partnership has functioned, by design, since the very beginning of the station's operational life. Even through previous periods of severe diplomatic strain between Washington and Moscow, American and Russian crews have continued flying, docking, and working together aboard the station without interruption, treated by both space agencies as a partnership that operates on its own separate track from broader political relations. Crew-13 isn't the first mission to test that principle. It's simply the latest one to be asked about it directly, on camera, by a reporter who wanted to know whether that separation actually holds up under the weight of a war that has directly touched Kutryk's own heritage. It's worth stepping back and appreciating the scale of what these four people are actually training for, because the human moments in that press briefing sit on top of an enormously complex technical undertaking. Once Crew-13 docks with the station, joining Expedition 75, the crew will spend months conducting research spanning human physiology, physical sciences, technology demonstrations, and Earth and space science, all conducted in microgravity, an environment that changes how virtually every biological and physical process behaves compared to life on the ground. Alongside that research load, they'll be responsible for both internal and external maintenance of a station that has now been continuously operated for more than a quarter century, aging hardware that requires increasingly careful, hands-on upkeep the longer it stays in operation. All. While several spacewalks remain on the schedule, each one carrying its own distinct set of risks that have nothing to do with the geopolitics happening back on Earth and everything to do with the simple, unforgiving physics of working in a vacuum. This is also, notably, the 13th operational crew rotation NASA has flown under its Commercial Crew Program partnership with SpaceX, and the 21st crewed orbital flight of a Crew Dragon spacecraft overall. That track record matters context-wise. This isn't an experimental or first-of-its-kind vehicle carrying this crew. It's a mature, repeatedly flown spacecraft, operating within a program that has become NASA's primary method of getting American and international astronauts to and from the space station since the retirement of the Space Shuttle program years earlier. The routine nature of the hardware, though, doesn't make the human stakes any smaller for the 4 people actually strapping into it. Delaney, Kutryk, and Teteryatnikov are all flying to space for the first time in their lives. Watkins is stepping into a role no NASA astronaut has held before her, commanding her second Dragon mission after having already spent nearly 6 months living aboard the very station she's now heading back to lead a crew on. As for the mission's true purpose, beyond the maintenance schedule and the spacewalks and the research manifest, Watkins captured it plainly in her own remarks to the teams gathered at Kennedy Space Center. She said the crew is certainly grateful for the opportunity to both represent and serve their communities, their colleagues, and their countries. Plural. A word choice that matters given who's actually sitting in that capsule, not one country. 3, at minimum, counting NASA, the Canadian Space Agency, and Roscosmos, with the entire mission itself representing the ongoing, deliberately maintained cooperation between all of them, even as the broader world those agencies operate inside of continues to fracture along exactly the kinds of lines that question about Kutryk's Ukrainian heritage was pointing directly at. Four people, representing 3 space agencies, and, in the case of Kutryk and Teteryatnikov specifically, 2 countries locked in active conflict on the ground, are preparing to spend months together in one of the most physically demanding and interdependent working environments human beings have ever built. One of them will miss the birth of his child while orbiting the planet at 17,000 miles an hour. Another is stepping into a role no NASA astronaut has held before her. And when directly asked on camera whether the war between their 2 nations follows them into orbit, the answer given wasn't a diplomatic non-answer. It was a specific, personal claim that the human relationships built inside this program have simply never bent under that weight, and a stated belief that they never will. Whether that claim holds up under the reality of months spent together in a pressurized capsule orbiting a planet at war with itself in more places than one is something only the mission itself, once it actually launches, will be able to answer. For now, the test drive is this Friday. The launch window opens no earlier than September 12th at 6:30 in the evening, and 4 astronauts who have spent months training together on the ground are about to find out together exactly what that answer looks like above it.